Right, shall I begin? Well, let's start at the beginning. So whether they're fighting, shouting, or climbing all over the furniture, or embarrassing you in restaurants, it's very easy to feel like a failure when your kids misbehave. So if you're stressed out, exhausted, or at your wits' end with your children, don't panic. Tonight, hopefully, I'm going to give you some ideas that you perhaps haven't tried before, because obviously having well-behaved kids, of course, is possible, no matter how challenging they may seem. You just need to know the secrets, and sometimes I feel it's about your confidence, your body language, your tone of voice, and your expectations, expecting your children to behave in certain ways. I often say it's a good idea to get a piece of paper and jot down, fold it in half, and on one half of the piece of paper write what is acceptable, on the other half write what isn't acceptable, and just spend a few minutes with a cup of coffee jotting down some of your house rules, really, or things that you think are okay and things that you don't think are okay. And then I also suggest, when I'm working with my clients, to then perhaps have that cup of coffee or a glass of wine with your partner, if you have one, and talk it through so that you are singing from the same song sheet and kids don't kind of play you off one against the other if you're playing, you know, good cop, bad cop. So I'm hoping in this webinar that you'll learn the real secrets to having well-behaved kids. I hope that I'll help you understand your child's behaviour and help you to set appropriate positive boundaries. I hope I'm going to give you some tried and tested techniques that really work, that will help you to feel less stressed, more relaxed, and more confident in your own ability to raise happy, confident, resilient children. I'll take a look at babies and toddlers, preschoolers, school age, and teenagers. So hopefully all the ages and stages will be covered briefly tonight, of course, because I can only do so much in such a short time, but hopefully we'll give you some new ideas, give you a bit of confidence, give you some direction, and certainly give you some clarity. So let's have a look at why kids need boundaries and rules. Well, discipline is about helping children learn how to behave appropriately in different situations, really, when you're not there, when they've grown up and they can monitor and self-regulate themselves. So it's all really about you showing them, guiding them, nurturing them, expecting them to make mistakes in certain situations, but also then, you know, teaching them what the rules are in all these different environments that they will find themselves in. Because your boundaries and rules will teach them to self-regulate, as I've said, and as they mature and grow up, they'll also learn over time to have self-control and to behave appropriately. Now, you can use a range of discipline strategies to teach your child the basics of good behaviour. It's down to personal choice and what feels right for you. But smacking, in my opinion, is never acceptable, because there are so many studies to show really that you damage a child's self-esteem, you can shame them, you can humiliate them. And as I've said many times on TV, when I was talking to Eamon Holmes, I remember once, he said, you know, what's wrong with a little tap? Well, the thing is, when does it start? When they're a baby and they really can't, you know, they don't know any better. And when does it stop? When they're 16, 6 foot, and they turn around and say to you, well, that didn't hurt. So really, I tend to feel that there are so many positive ways to raise happy, confident children with love and kindness and patience that you really don't ever need to smack. But we've done lots of podcasts on this, we've done e-courses, we've done lots of campaigning around this whole topic. If you're interested in learning alternatives to smacking, that's another night, really. But anyway, let's carry on. You have 12, 19 and 23 tomorrow. Any different opinions on smacking? Right, that's interesting, isn't it? I wonder what other people think about smacking. But the strategies you choose will depend, I think, on your child's age. So let's have a look. Discipline is about helping your child learn how to behave as well as how not to behave. And of course, as I've said many times, it works best when you have a warm and loving relationship with your child, because discipline doesn't always or even often mean punishment. In fact, discipline and discipline strategies work best when they're positive. Yes, thank you, Shana. You agree with us, smacking is never okay. Well, we're on the same song sheet, I hope, around that. Now, I think discipline's built on talking and listening and guiding children towards knowing what behaviour is appropriate, whether it's at home, a friend's house, in childcare or preschool, or even at school. And it's managing their own behaviour and teaching them to develop important life skills like the ability to get along well with others now, and also, of course, as they get older. So they need to learn to understand, they need to learn to manage, and to also express their feelings in safe and healthy ways. So choosing an approach to discipline is about finding that right balance. Not enough discipline can leave children feeling a little bit insecure and parents feeling a little bit out of control. And too much harsh and negative discipline and not enough praise and rewards, of course, might get children behaving well, but it's out of fear. And that's not really a good thing either, because that can lead to problems with children's self-esteem and anxiety later on in life. So let's look at choosing an approach to discipline. Discipline works best when it's firm and it's fair, and definitely when it's consistent. Now, this means that you set limits and consequences for your child's behaviour, while also encouraging good behaviour with praise and rewards and other strategies. Now, your approach to discipline will also depend on things like your parenting style and your personality, as well as your child's stage of development, and of course their temperament and personality. Also, it depends on how tired or overwhelmed you are feeling at the time. So make sure that you get regular me time away from your kids to replenish your batteries and recharge your energy and your patience. I think it's very important. Loads of mums that I work with put themselves right down the bottom of the list and feel very guilty if they have a bit of me time. And I think it's the absolute opposite. You need to get a break. You need to have, a bath with scented candles, or visit a friend, or phone a friend, or go out to the cinema. Keep your own life going. It's very important. And then, of course, if you have a partner, you've got to spin that plate as well and find some we time to spend together to keep your relationship going. So Kevin says that he had a pretty harsh parent approach to discipline. Yes, me time's very tricky. Does anyone manage it? I hope you do get yourself some me time. It's very important to me that you do come back refreshed. So there we are. It's a nice little picture of having a bit of me time, or we time. They're looking out onto the sea with fancy hats. Now, physical punishment, for example, smacking, we've mentioned, doesn't teach children how to behave. It makes them frightened of you long term if that's how you hit and smack, and if they're not sure of what they've done wrong. So when parents use physical punishment, children are more likely to have challenging behaviour actually, and anxiety or even depression. There's also a risk that smacking might hurt your child physically, of course, as well as emotionally. Now, this is a poster that I made ages ago, and it sort of sums up when I'm talking about it. When I'm on radio and TV, they talk about, oh, well, I was smacked and it never did me any harm. I think when a child hits a child, we call it aggression. And when a child hits an adult, we call it hostility. And when an adult hits an adult, we would certainly call that assault. And yet when an adult hits a child, we call that discipline. Val, I need support from partner to do that positively. Yes, it's really nice if your partner and yourself can sing from the same song sheet. It's not always possible, of course not, because people have different styles of doing things. And that's why I suggest sometimes it's a good idea to, get out of the house, away from the family and the kids in a way, to keep the conversation then more neutral, and talk about your different styles of discipline so that you back each other up. And I think that's really quite important for children to see that you sing from the same song sheet. So let's have a look at discipline at different ages. Now, the ways that you can use discipline will change, of course, as your child grows and develops. And I work with so many parents of teenagers at times because they're still speaking to the 14-year-old as if they are only 4. And in fact, that doesn't work. You've got to be flexible and change your style of parenting as your children grow, develop, and mature. Yeah, I think you're right, Shana. I think if you end up hitting your children, then you've lost control. And it worries me then, because then, you know, if you're doing it in anger yourself, it can be a little bit too hard. And of course, they're going to role model. You're right, Shana. They're going to copy that behavior. And of course, they go out into the world and into the playground, and they think if they don't get their own way, or they're frustrated, or, you know, things like that, then they'll lash out. So I agree with you on that. Now, under the age of 1 year, babies don't really, of course, understand right from wrong, and they don't do things to be naughty. They're just learning, and they're just being themselves. So a lot of your baby's behavior is about testing out what he or she can do and what happens when they do things. They're just discovering. So when your baby pulls your hair, for example, you might say no and show him or her how to touch your hair gently. Talk and teach them. That's what it's all about, all the way through, really. And you'll probably need to do this over and over again, because your baby might not remember from one time to the next. So you've got to have patience. I remember talking to somebody once, and they said, oh, isn't it a bit like dog training? You have to keep on repeating yourself over and over again until they get the hang of it. And I suppose that's where the analogy, I suppose, ends. But you're right, it's a bit like training a puppy, really. Now, punishing or using negative consequences for babies doesn't work, because they don't understand what they've done. They need warm, loving care so they can feel secure and safe as they explore the world. So talk and teach with patience, and be prepared for lots of repetition. Now, from toddlers, well, of course, I always think the toddler stage is a fascinating one, but it's really about seeing how they are trying to assert their independence. And once you see a toddler as a fascinating, you know, becoming from a baby to a little person, they can, you know, definitely understand more about cause and effect. So they're testing you out, and your toddler might sometimes do something to get a reaction from you. For example, throwing food, or certainly having a tantrum is not getting their own way when you say no at Sainsbury's checkout. I think they have removed the sweets from the checkouts now, haven't they? But, you know, sometimes it is to get your attention, particularly, unfortunately, as lots of people I see out and about are on their mobile phones. So sometimes children will do things to get your attention. But also, it's usually born of frustration. They don't have the language or the speech development to be able to explain to you how they're feeling. So I go into a lot of detail in my Toddler Taming MP3, which you can download from my website, which talks you through different discipline strategies, loads and loads of things there, bursting with ideas to help you if you are struggling or you'd like to improve your, you know, your relationship with your toddler and understand what that age and stage is all about. And you can see the link at the bottom there, parentingcoach.com, product positive-toddler-taming. So if you're interested in that, you can download that tonight and have a little listen to that. More detail about toddlers. Also, my toddler course on my online parenting club covers discipline and behaviour, ages and stages, and really is bursting with lots of practical tips. There's 24 sections to that, and it's my toddler system, that one, and that's on an e-course. It's free to my club members, so if you're a member of my club, go on there and just start watching the videos and listening to all those sorts of tips on that very comprehensive e-course that I created a while back. Now, from the age of 3 years, most toddlers and preschoolers have a good understanding of what is acceptable behaviour and what isn't. Doesn't mean they're not going to test you out, but they do start to have a good understanding, because preschoolers are often, you know, starting to spend more time away from you and away from home. They're at preschool or nursery or childcare, or they're in a play group. So they get more chances to test out what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable social behaviour. So techniques for preschoolers is stop the action. If they're, you know, if they're doing something that they shouldn't be doing, intervene kindly but firmly. Don't have to get cross, you just need to talk and teach them. They need to learn. They're very egocentric. They think the world evolves just around them. So you've got to look for the positive intention behind their behaviour. So no matter how terribly your toddler or preschooler expresses their feelings, whether it's curiosity or anger or whatever, it's important to honour the positive intent and the impulse behind their behaviour. And that will then guide you into how you react and respond to what they've done. Now, that doesn't mean only acknowledging that it's there. The misbehaviour is not okay, of course, if they've hit someone over the head with a toy, and you need to deal with it. But until you let your child know that you understand why the behaviour happened, any consequences won't really be fully effective, because I always think a child who feels heard feels understood, and you're there to talk and teach them and guide them into the sort of behaviour that they need to start to learn for themselves. So sometimes naming the emotion for them, oh, I can see that you're angry, but we don't use our hands to sort things out. Tell George why you're angry with him. Let's share that toy now, shall we? George, you go first, and then let's swap. So you've acknowledged that your child is feeling angry and frustrated and all the rest of it, but you're actually then guiding him into the behaviour that you do want. So what was your child's positive intent? Well, young children, as I've said many times, are egocentric, and they haven't the maturity or vocabulary to express their emotions easily yet. So be patient, but be clear about what is and what isn't acceptable, and teach them a better way to handle things, and be consistent in that. Talk and teach, that's my big thing. I'm always on about talking and teaching your kids, because I think that's what our job is as a parent, talk and teach them. Your little one also needs to know the impact of their actions. So Sophie, when you pushed Jamil off the swing, it hurts him. Explain why that's not a good idea, and it's explained that, you know, he's going to be hurt. Sophie may simply be unaware of how strong she is, perhaps, and so giving her information about the consequences of her actions is part of teaching her to make decisions, or make better decisions next time on her own. Always set clear verbal limits with your voice. Sophie, you mustn't push Jamil. We are gentle with our friends. I'd like you to come down now. Tone of voice is important, body language, and meaning business. You know, you mean it. You're not just going, please come down, Sophie. It's about your tone of voice as well. Because even when kids are very verbal and understand what you're saying and why, they may not have the self-control, and they may not be capable of stopping themselves or actually of obeying your requests because they're immature. Again, set physical limits with young children. Words are not always enough, so follow up verbal limits with physical limits, and do it before you get angry so there's no punitive quality to it. And what I mean by that is, you know, if a child is drawing on the wall with both, you know, you need to go up and say something with your words, but you also need to act quickly so that your beautiful wallpaper or beautiful wall is not spoilt. So you could say something like, no, Amal, we don't draw on walls. I'm going to take you into the bathroom now, and then we're both going to clean it up. Follow up, of course, calmly and firmly and kindly. Now, kids don't always listen, and their bodies sometimes need help stopping dangerous activities, because if your 3-year-old is running off into the traffic, suddenly saying, Rosie, that's not such a good idea, isn't really going to be very helpful or really a very good idea, is it? So you need to pick up your child quickly to save her, obviously, from running out into the road. So that's the same thing as like the physical limits of like removing the pen from Amal's hand. They're different from physical disciplinary techniques like slapping the pen from, from their hands, but it is about really restraining them sometimes to keep them safe. And what I mean by that is it's like a very strong hug. And without hurting a child, you simply just, restrain them, calm them down, like when they're about to run into the road. You know, you need to be on top of that situation, of course. Now, I think as they grow a little older, that you can provide choices for them, because choices are part of daily life with toddlers and preschoolers. So I always tend to suggest limited choices between 2 options. So do you want to wear your red jumper or the blue one? And they are an essential part of teaching your child to make a choice, but you are actually in control, because you're just saying, you know, you're going to wear a jumper basically because it's cold outside. But they feel, if they're in that preschool age, that they have some sort of choice in the matter, and they have some sort of feeling of independence around it. So giving your child choices, will you stop throwing sand, or should I help you stop? Teaches your child that they are entitled to their opinions and that they have some say in their quest for independence, but it shows your child respect. And I think respect is the key energy of any happy family, from toddlers, babies, right up to, you know, preschool and teenagers and beyond, because it demonstrates your trust in them to make a better choice. Now we look at natural consequences. Well, preschoolers are rarely logical enough to understand logical consequences. So the best approach is to allow and point out natural consequences. So you hit David. Now David is sad and crying, and he doesn't want to play with you anymore today. Or you could say, well, you threw your cereal on the floor and now it's all gone. Now, this is an interesting one that I wonder if you've heard of: active listening and the sportscasting technique. Now, active listening mirrors back to the speaker what they've already said. And since preschoolers are not very verbally skilled, using active listening with your young child relies more on hearing what they're saying through their actions than it actually does, you know, relying on listening to their words. It's a way of letting them know what you understand about their feelings, basically. And it's a way of help them clarify how they're feeling. Now, sportscasting is related to active listening, though it concentrates more on the events rather than on the feelings involved. So in sportscasting, for example, you observe and you describe, a bit like the World Cup's on at the moment. So you are the sportscaster, and you say something like, Colin, I see that you're dumping sand out of the sand pit and you're throwing your trucks. Now, I saw that Henry laughed at that. And so you can explain it, or you're just actually observing and describing what's going on. And, you know, they can then work out perhaps from that why they're feeling bad about the event. And it's like active listening, but it can be used to help resolve conflicts. You're merely the announcer, if you like, describing events and letting each child see what they've, you know, that you've seen what's gone on, and that there is somebody else there too who has a point of view on the subject. So you're helping them. And that's a step towards kids resolving their own problems later on as they mature, which is ultimately where you want to lead them in life, isn't it, really? Well, behave yourself and time out. Yes, well, like all discipline, timeouts are a teaching tool. Super Nanny's got the naughty step. If you just banish your child to a room and say, think about it, they'll learn that when they're frustrated, or when people are angry or too much trouble, people don't want to be around them. And many of us only learn to deal with anger and frustration when we are alone rather than in a supported situation. So I think children need support when they've made mistakes or got things wrong, because really it's just sending them to their room to think about it, really a helpful way to talk and teach your young child. Now, timeout is a way, as of course, of separating your child from the moment or the person or the object that's causing the trouble. It's a way of saying, come on, take a breath, you know, take a rest. Let's take you away from the situation. And it's not a punishment, and it shouldn't be seen as a threat. You know, Terry, stop biting, or I'll put you in timeout. It's to give the child a bit of a step back from the situation, because a timeout should be simply imposed immediately at that moment, not later when you get home or anything. It's got to be there and then, certainly with preschoolers who are right in the moment. And it shouldn't be for more than about 3 minutes or so. Egg timers, I find, work well for timeout, because they just give a child a calming down moment, a pausing to ponder moment, and a collecting your thoughts moment. Now, I was on radio a lot last week talking about the 2 children who were made to sit in the supermarket in Tesco's and face the fruit and vegetables because they had been running around all through the supermarket apparently and annoying their mum and getting in the way of others. So she had a sort of a timeout thing that she used to do at home, which is sort of like the naughty step. And she just took it, you know, that concept with her into Tesco's. And unfortunately, her friend plastered it up on social media, and she ended up on TV and radio explaining all of that. But it was really just using that time out moment really in the supermarket to calm her two kids down who were 6 and 7. So keep it brief. Here's another technique for preschoolers. Keep that time out if you're going to use it. Keep it brief, because the idea is to break the action and the mood, not the child. And it's to allow a little bit of cooling down if things are getting a bit hot and bothered or out of hand. For little ones, keep a timeout to 1 minute per year of their age. You can put a child in the timeout in a separate room, but a better idea is to keep the child near you, perhaps on a special chair or a cushion, so you can talk and teach them at the same time too if you want to. And when a child returns from a timeout, don't put them back into the environment or the activity that was part of the problem. Start them on a new activity, redirect them, and immediately find something positive to reinforce. So you're constantly looking for positive reinforcement and positive praise, because I'm a great believer in positive parenting, and then they can feel better about themselves. So, for example, say Lawrence is throwing food and Vikas and Katie are laughing hysterically. Lawrence won't stop, so you separate him from the action for about 3 minutes in another room. And when you bring him back, don't put him at the table with Vikas and Katie all over again. Give him, for example, painting materials or whatever else you've got handy. Put him on a different activity and then immediately give him positive feedback. You know, for example, if he's painting or something, what great colours you've chosen. So you're reinforcing the positive behaviour again that you want to see. So redirecting the action, most discipline, techniques for toddlers and preschoolers involve redirection and diversion. And it may be the most basic disciplinary technique of all, because if you don't like a baby grabbing at your hair, you just give him a rattle to hold, don't you? Which is, a redirecting action. And of course, as kids that get a little bit bigger, redirection becomes part of almost every disciplinary action, whether it's active listening or sportscasting or imposing verbal or physical restraints or using, all those natural consequences or timeouts. It's all about really just making sure that your child understands your rules and that you have consequences and you offer them choices, but they understand what they are and you're consistent in them, whatever you decide they are for your family. So we're coming to the end now of that preschooler section. Are there any questions on that or any points that people like to mention?
There's a question from Shana there. If they really want to return to the activity, how would you manage that?
Yes, I see that. Yeah, that's a good point, Shana. Well, again, you've got to be in the moment. You've got to weigh up the situation that you find yourself in there. If they want to go back to it, perhaps you can then reinforce the behaviour that you do want to see. So remember now, when you come back, you're going to use your hands kindly and you're going to play nicely with the other two or whatever it might be. So guide them to the behaviour that you do want to see. And as soon as they show a spark of doing that, high praise. Oh, I'm so pleased. That's so lovely. That's wonderful. Big smile, big hug, or whatever you want to do. Make sure that they feel that, getting it right is the wonderful thing, because children want to please you naturally all the time anyway. So I hope that answers that question, Shana. So let's have a look at school-age kids. I mean, school-age children might know how to behave in different places, for example, at school and at home and at friend's house, on a bus or in the library. But they still need you to remind them of their limits and reward them for good behaviour. So the secret to having well-behaved kids is another of my MP3 downloads where I go right into detail all around all my ideas and techniques, strategies and tips all around the secret to having well-behaved kids. You can see that at the bottom there. If you go to my products page on my website after this, there are all sorts, about 21 different MP3s that I've recorded over the years, from sibling rivalry to all sorts of things, from school-age children right up to toddlers and teenagers. So check out the secret to well-behaved kids if you'd like to go into more detail about that. This is just my easy listening e-course, and you'll learn the real secrets there. I've talked you through that. because I'm all about really trying to help you feel less stressed, more relaxed and more confident in your own ability to raise happy, confident, resilient children, because you know your children better than anybody else in the world. I'm just giving you some top tips that I have found to work over the years with all my clients. Now, in schools, most teachers have positive strategies for managing challenging behaviour in the classroom and, of course, in the playground. And if you're worried about your child's behaviour, talking with your child's teacher is a great first step. You know, they're usually there on the doorstep when you go into school in the mornings or when you pick them up, certainly in primary school. So, you know, get into that habit of just checking in now and again with the teacher to see how it's going. I always think it's a good idea to work together. When I was a deputy head and teacher for many years, I used to feel I wanted to build bridges, not walls between parents, because we're there together to support and help your child if they're struggling to behave in school. So one of the key things is to set behaviour expectations, because setting expectations for your child's behaviour lays the groundwork for your approach to your family's discipline. So here's how to get started. Decide on family rules. Not many people do this. When I work with my clients one-to-one or in my forum or in my group coaching sessions, I get people to write down what are some of your family rules and get it down on paper so you actually think about it, talk to your partner about it, and then let the kids in on the rules so they know what's expected of them. So many people don't really do that, and that's just such a simple thing to do. And it really transforms your parenting and, you know, your discipline, and makes everything much, much easier if you know what your rules are. So a good place to start is just with 4 or 5 family rules. I worked with a lovely mum in Caterham once who had 35 rules on the back of the door, and her 5-year-old was busy hitting pillows. He was so frustrated because he just couldn't keep up with all the rules. So don't have too many, but on the other hand, do set some so your kids know what to expect, you know, and also ponder then the consequences if they break those rules. So, you know, you could have things like we speak nicely to each other, we look after each other or other people in the family, and everyone helps out around the house. You know, little ones lay the table, bigger ones empty the dishwasher, you know, whatever it is in your house that you want your children to get involved with. And then decide on the family rules. When children are school age and above, you can involve them in helping to decide on sort of, you know, creating these rules and working with you, perhaps on what the family rules should be in their house. The kids have got great ideas, and often we don't ask them, you know, how do we sort out the problem with the wash basket, you know, who takes it down on a Wednesday? So kids will come up with all sorts of wonderful ideas. And again, teach your children what to expect, what behaviour is expected in your house, because every family is different, and that's what makes it wonderful and special. And children, of course, learn by watching what you do. So showing your child the behaviour that you like by doing it yourself, of course, will be a great role model to them and help them learn. And again, for example, if you want your child to sit down to eat, sitting down together to eat family meals can really help children learn that behaviour. And, you know, it connects you. And I have a whole e-course and webinar all on the crucial C's. And one of those is about connecting with each other, because children who feel connected to you, to each other, to your family, to your community, to school and to society, you know, don't get into so much trouble as they grow up through particularly the teenage years. And I want you to get into the habit of praising your child for good behaviour. Praise is when you tell your child what you like about their behaviour. And it can be very simple, but it's good to point out to children when they are getting things right. So many parents just focus on when kids do something wrong, and it can be very disheartening and demoralising if you're constantly nagging and telling your kids what they don't do rather than telling them what they do get right. And of course, they want to please you, and they'll do more of the behaviour that you've praised them for. And I always say that descriptive praise is when you tell your child exactly what it is that you like, because being specific is a really good way of encouraging a child. So, for example, Ari, I really like how you used please and thank you just then. Great manners with your brother and sister. Fantastic. Well done. So be very specific about what you've noticed. they love it, and it makes it clear what you want to see more of. Now, this is my That Was Easy button. Super Nanny has the naughty step. I have the That Was Easy button, which is far more positive. It's my alternative to the naughty step. And there it is. It was started off actually when I was using them from Staples, the stationers, and you press the button, and when children would run up, it's a great way to anchor confidence in your child's unconscious and attach doing new things, having a go, doing the right thing, perhaps doing it the first time that they're told. All instills these feelings of confidence and positivity and success through simply laughing and pressing the button that says that was easy. So now I have my own easy button that you can download and buy from my website, and you can record your own voice saying that was easy, and kids absolutely love it. It makes them laugh and they crack up, and I used to use it in all the schools that I go into for my confident classes for kids. Very simple, very easy, but very, very positive. So it builds confidence and self-esteem, which is what I'm all about, really, just having fun and being relaxed. So off they go and press, that was easy. You see, pressing the button and hearing a positive message is what you call an anchor in something that I'm trained in, which is neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP for short. And it's when your mood changes in response to a trigger or a stimulus, and your unconscious registers it every time you see it. That's why it works, and that's why kids love it, and it's fun as well. And I've even had children who've sent me in messages and photos and all sorts of things. A little 4-year-old was in the car, and they didn't have the easy button with them, but she just pressed her tummy button instead, and she did up her seatbelt and said to her mummy, that was easy. So I think it's a wonderful, fun way of helping children behave and get success from what they're doing. You can read more about it if you're interested in my That Was Easy button, if you go to one of my blogs there at the bottom, and you can learn more about how to use it there. You can buy your own easy button on my website there as well, all those different colours. Right, now, setting clear limits and consequences. I want you to decide on a consequence for breaking a family rule, because it's down to you and your family what your consequences are. For example, you might withhold pocket money from an 8-year-old if she hasn't done her household chores. But if she hits her brother, maybe time out is a better consequence. So pause to ponder tonight with a piece of paper, and just pause to ponder what are your limits and what are your consequences, because children are, they're motivated towards something or they're motivated away from. And each child in a family will be unique and different. And once you've cracked that, then you'll know which way to motivate them towards a sticker or a story or stay over or sleep over, or away from, which is, take away their favorite TV program, or, cut down on their iPad use, or certainly later on if they're teenagers, you only have to take a mobile phone away for half an hour and they're panicking. So, towards or away from, very interesting point to ponder. So Catherine says that you've never written down your rules, but we have rules and we do talk about them as a family. Well, that's fantastic, Catherine, because that's the same thing, really. If you're talking about it, you're sharing it, your children are in on it, and that, you can talk about these things. It's fantastic. Lots of parents I tend to work with don't think to talk about it and let their children in on it. So that's fantastic. I don't know how often you do that, but it's a great way of doing it. I often suggest just having a family meal from time to time, or once a week, where you chat about how things are going, what the kids have got right that week and what you're proud of. And, if there's a little niggle or a little worry or something hasn't been quite done properly, then, it's a good idea to nip it in the bud right there and then, and not let it fester and sort of, get too big a problem. So let's look now at discipline at different stages, the teenage years. Here we go. So around this time, your child starts secondary school, you might need to adjust your approach to discipline. Now, people don't often think of that. They think, oh, well, my child should do as I say. But actually, they are becoming independent and they are growing up. They are wanting to, stretch their muscles and explore the world. And I think effective discipline for teenagers focuses on setting agreed limits and helping teenagers work within them. This autocratic do as I say can often really not work with teenagers. You have to adapt your style. I think you need to become more flexible. So Catherine says, mine no breaking rules, lose them time on the electronic devices or being given extra jobs around the house. Good call. That's working well in your house, Catherine. Well done. Fantastic. Thank you for that. That's going to help other people too. Right, here are the basics. I don't think that discipline isn't about punishment. It's about teaching children appropriate ways to behave. That already shifts your mindset, I think. And for teenagers, discipline is about agreeing on and setting appropriate limits and helping them to behave within those limits, because it's about teaching them consequences. And time again, I say this on radio and TV and with my clients, you are there to be your children's parent, not their friend. So you need to, instead of using a sledgehammer throughout the teenage years, I think you need to nudge and nurture your teenagers into becoming independent. And you don't need to sort of rob them of that opportunity, you know, to make mistakes, but always ask them what they learned from whatever they've made a mistake on. And don't leave them out to dry and angry if they've got things wrong and challenged you a little bit. It's about talking with them and trying to nurture and guide them. Don't build walls between you. Keep building bridges. It's very important. And when your child was younger, you probably use a range of discipline strategies to teach them the basics. And now your child's growing into a teenager, you can use limits and boundaries to help them learn independence. You need to teach them to take responsibility for their own behavior and, of course, its outcomes. And you need to help them solve their problems with them. Your child needs these skills to become a young, successful adult with their own standards for appropriate behaviour and respect for themselves, as well as respect for others. So I think that an important part of this is learning to stick to some clear rules agreed on in advance and with agreed consequences. So everybody knows what's expected and what will happen if some of these things, get broken. Now, you have to remember that teenagers are really just very tall toddlers because they don't have all the skills. Now, of course, they think they know it all. Of course they do. And they, want to make their own decisions. But you need to limit because you have the bigger picture. It's a dangerous world out there online or when they're out in the shopping centre or wherever they're going. So you need them to understand that you have their best interest at heart. You're putting boundaries around them because you love them. You don't care what their friend's mother is doing and saying, but they need to know that these are their limits within your family that you agree on, that are, you are still a very important influence on your teenager. So I think teenage discipline is most effective when you communicate openly with your teenage child, so you can check in with each other about how the limits and rules are working, have regular sort of meals on a Sunday or whenever you get together on a Friday night or something, and talk about what's going well and what isn't. Be actively involved and engaged in their lives. And that really helps with discipline because they know that you love them, care for them, and feel connected to them. Build and maintain a warm and loving family environment so your child feels safe to make mistakes. Children with warm family relationships learn to control their own behaviour, especially when it's guided by you. Now, negotiation is a very good skill to develop at this stage with teenagers. It's the key part of communicating with them because it can really avoid problems. Now, people say, oh, well, no, I don't want to negotiate. I'm the one in charge. Well, that's where some of these problems can really kind of fire up because you need to sort of develop a different skill set when you're talking to a teenager, and negotiating with your child shows that you respect his ideas or her ideas, her growing maturity. It also helps him or her learn to compromise where necessary, because that's part of decision making. And it also helps you, kind of negotiate with your child and not get sort of angry with them and distant from them and detached from them. Stay connected to them. It's very important. Agree on clear limits, though, and have clear expectations. And, that can actually then discourage the problem from happening in the first place. But limits also help your child develop positive social behaviour, including showing concern for others. So here are some tips for setting clear limits. As I've said, it might be a bit of a different style for you, but involve your teenage child in working out the limits and the rules. When your child feels that you listen to her, she can contribute and she'll be more likely to see you as fair and stick to the agreed rules. Be clear about the behaviour that you do expect. It can help to check that your child has understood your expectations. For example, a rule such as come home after the film might mean one thing to you, but I've worked with families where it sometimes ends up meaning something completely different to the child. So you need to be very precise and specific. For example, you think it's sort of a bit Mary Poppins-y, but be very clear. Come straight home after the film ends and don't go anywhere else. So it's very clear about what your expectations are. Discuss responsibilities with your teenage child. For example, I'm responsible for providing for you and you have responsibilities too, such as tidying your room now that you're 15. I don't think that's unreasonable. And agree in advance with your child what the consequences will be if they don't stick to your house rules that you've all agreed on. I think it's quite helpful to use descriptive praise when your child follows through on agreed limits. So, do thank them and say things like, well, thanks for coming straight home after the film. That's brilliant. Thank you. And that will then build up good relationships with them. It will mean that they will, you'll give them more trust the next time. They'll understand that and be willing to discuss and adjust your rules as your child shows responsibility or as they get older, because then you can extend their curfew or whatever you had set them as a rule. So different families obviously have different standards and rules of behaviour. So check whether yours are realistic and reasonable. I worked with a family fairly recently and they were still asking, I think their 17-year-old son, he was still being expected to say, may I leave the table when he was, finished his dinner. So you need to kind of set those rules and adapt them so that they're realistic and reasonable for the age of your child. Many schools actually can also help with this guidance, but a bit of common sense, I think, really won't go amiss. Now, sometimes your child, of course, might behave in ways that test your limits or break the rules that you've agreed on. So one way, of course, to deal with this is by using consequences and sticking to them. So make the consequence fit. If you can make the consequence fit the misbehaviour, it gets your child to think about the issue and can feel fairer to your child too, because they can see it's linked to what they chose to do. So, for example, if your child is late home than the agreed time, well, the fitting consequence might be to having come home early, earlier next time, or you're going to pick them up, or, they won't go. You can do all sorts of things around that. Withdraw cooperation. I mean, the aim of this strategy is to help your child understand your perspective and to learn that, they need to give and take. For example, if your child wants you to drive them to social outings, because I remember being a taxi driver for a couple of years with my two kids, you could say that you'll only do that if they follow the rules, but don't make it sort of into a bribe, but do link that you're doing your bit and they need to do their bit. You're withdrawing your cooperation, really. So, if you'd like me to keep driving you, you need to come home on time. If you're late, I won't drive you next time. And don't make empty threats, as all the way through disciplining any child. Don't make an empty threat, because that is just a hiding to nothing. They won't listen to you next time. But all of this is to help your teenager understand your perspective and to learn about give and take. Well, the consequences, should be sparing. If you use the same one over and over again and it's too severe, it won't work. So the idea is to remove something that your child enjoys, like going to a friend's house or their mobile phone, of course. But you do need to let your child know in advance that that's what you plan to do. And again, withdraw privileges. You don't need to withdraw privilege for a long time. I had a client once that the child, I can't remember exactly what he did. He was a teenager of 15 and she just said, well, that's it. No more, social media until Christmas. And this was in June. So that didn't fit the crime, so to speak. And I had to explain to her that that really was, somewhat unrealistic unenforceable and just too much. So aim for a short withdrawal that occurs within the next few days following the misbehaviour. So communicate, explain calmly and clearly what the problem is to your child. Tell them how they haven't stuck to the rules and that you had all agreed on, and let them know that you'll be applying the agreed consequences. Don't be frightened to, tough love, and be confident with your child. As I say, you're there to be their parent, not their friend. But then also do try and encourage them to, to have some form of self-reflection. They need to take responsibility for the choices that they have made. Whether they're toddlers or teenagers, they chose sometimes certain things. So you need to talk to them about what's happened and why things have gone a bit wrong. That will often settle future sort of consequences so that people and your children see it as sort of fair, really, that they understand where you're coming from. But more importantly, they've learned to self-regulate, see where they took responsibility, where they made a poor choice or could make a better one next time. So, of course, it's always best to balance your rules and your consequences with warmth and positivity. And I always say, try to aim for 6 positive comments for every negative comment. There's a challenge for you this week. Well, the reason why teenagers test the limits is because they want to develop into independent adults. And they will do this by testing your boundaries and seeing how you react and how others react to the behaviour. And of course, they're learning all the time and they're getting feedback, and that's where they're learning. But of course, if you're clear about what you're expecting, then they certainly learn quicker. And on top of this, the teenage brain goes through massive growth and development during adolescence. So as a result, teenagers are trying new things and they don't always make good decisions because they're young. And we've got to kind of guide them and nurture them into making better ones. And of course, it's important that they hang out with the right peers, because as Jim Rohn says, what have they got you doing? What have they got you thinking? What have they got you reading or believing in yourself or aspiring to? So we've got to kind of talk and teach our children to have a look round sometimes at some of our friends that we're hanging out with and work out whether they're a positive or a negative influence. And of course, hormones are high and everything feels very intense, and they feel things more intensely than we do as we've gone through all of this. So just bear that in mind and, remember what it felt like to be 16 and in love too, perhaps. Now, they are getting better at this age and stage of seeing the bigger picture and reasoning. So they are questioning the world more, and they're using that to create a lot of problem solving, really. They see creativity, and they're rather idealistic at this age. And sometimes, it might feel that you're on a bit of a collision course with your child because you can see that that's all rather naive and a bit idealistic. But listen to them and allow them to grow into the human beings and adults that they want to be. And so if they suddenly, get very interested in Greenpeace, then, talk with them about why they're interested in some of those things. But you can work around obstacles with your child and guide them away from tricky situations by talking and teaching them, just as you did when they were little. So again, I have written an MP3 download about navigating the choppy waters of the teenage years. It was a 3-set CD at one point, and now it's a long MP3 broken into all sorts of, bursting with thoughts and ideas and tips. It really is quite a blueprint for parents of teenagers, covers drugs and sex and rock and roll and all those challenging times of teenagers. So check out my Navigating the Choppy Waters of the Teenage Years to give yourself some confidence, some clarity and some direction. So we're coming to the end. I hope you found the webinar helpful. One simple rule of thumb around behaviour is to use my crucial C's. So go and check out my articles on all of that. That's connection, capability, counting and courage, because I believe that that is really the basis of raising happy, confident toddlers, teenagers and babies right the way up to adults. You can find more about that in my parenting club, where I've done a webinar on the crucial C's. I've done an e-course on the crucial C's, and I've written lots of articles about that. Any questions? Now's your opportunity. Thank you, Shana. That's been, I'm delighted that you found it interesting. Thank you very much for that feedback, because sometimes you don't know. Chatting away here, hopefully people found some new ideas, a couple of things to pause to ponder. And that's just a takeaway, just to think about it perhaps when you go through this week. Now, I'd love you to tell other families about this webinar if you found it helpful, and about all my other webinars that I do every month. So look out for the next one. Here, if you take this Essay 10 for Life, all my parenting advice you need, it's all in one friendly, supportive place with a forum, all around babies to teenagers and beyond. There's a special lifetime discount code. If you take that now, that will be 10% off all my membership and all my services and all my products if you put that code in, Sue Atkins. So that's Essay 10 for Life.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. So the one question I had in there very quickly was, I wonder if there's a gender difference in teenagers or
I saw that.
Other ages of children when they're interpreting your instructions, or perhaps it's just too difficult to say. Maybe every child is different.
Well, it's an interest. I saw that actually, Kevin. It is interesting. I think it's personality rather than gender. I also think we're very wordy. Women are far more wordy than men. So if you need to give commands to children rather than ask them questions. Yeah. I think if your voice goes up, the intonation of it sounds like a question or a request rather than your voice going down, which tells them it's a command. And that can work perhaps better with boys. But I think it's about your tone of voice, your body language, and this thing about, do you mean business? Because I think children need to know that you mean what you say and that you're going to, follow up on some of it. And I think that's more important really than perhaps, differences in gender.
Yeah.
So thank you, Paula. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I hope you got some things to take away. Shana, thank you. Definitely lots to take away. Val, thank you for this. I think it's a big subject and perhaps parents might benefit from a more specific age range. Yes, we can do more webinars on just the toddlers or the school age or the preteen or the teenagers. Thank you for your feedback, Val. That might be something we can put into my program of studies and things that we're doing for e-courses and webinars going forward. So I hope everybody had a great evening. I'd love you to tell all your friends about it. Come and say hello to me on Twitter. Say hello to me on Facebook as Sue Atkins, the parenting expert, or I'm getting a bit more active on Instagram at Sue Atkins 18. So thank you for joining me. Until next time, take care.